Hi guys, it's Olivia here with painting class number 3. We're going to be doing a little nighttime scene, some fireflies, glass jar, moonlit outdoors. It looks a little bit complicated probably with all the layers, but I promise it's not as hard as it looks. I know I always say that, and hopefully that rings true for some of you, especially if some people here have never taken a class like this before. Welcome. Won't be as hard as it looks, so let's get started. So I'm coming in with the same setup that I always have here. I have my brushes. Again, you don't need all of these brushes at all to start your painting. You want to get one larger size brush, somewhere between this is probably a 2-inch, 1.5, 1-inch brush, something like this. You want to grab a medium sized brush, and of course that can vary anywhere from 3/4 inch, 1 inch, 1/2 inch, anything like this. It can be flat or round. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter. And then a smaller detailed brush. Try for something round if you have something like this. If not, no big deal if you have a small flat brush. Either something like this or something like this. That's fine because you can always turn them so that the angle works in your favor and you can get those teeny lines that you would get with a small rounded brush. So we have our brushes, our clean glass of water, our clean canvas, somewhere to put our paint, our actual paints, and our blow dryer over here. So during the course of this painting, I might say we're going to take pause and blow dry our painting. So you can either use a hair dryer all the way on the hottest setting, as high as it goes, and won't ruin the paint or anything. You can just do that for, it really only takes 30 seconds or a minute. If you don't have a blow dryer or don't want to get paint on your blow dryer, if you're not super careful, you can just let it air dry for a few minutes. There shouldn't be too much blow drying in this one. Maybe not at all, but we'll see. It's good to have just in case. I'm gonna tuck away some of my things back here. So right now I'm gonna take out my blue, my black, and my white. I already have some leftover white in my palette here, so I'm not gonna take out the container right now. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to start like we always do in the background. We're going to start right up here where the moon is. We're not going to put in the moon first, but that's going to be our starting point. And then we're going to radiate out with the rest of the sky. As you come away from the moon, the sky's going to get a little bit darker. You're going to see these kind of black streaks in the sky here. We're going to come about 3/4 of the way down. We don't need to paint the whole bottom part with the sky. We don't want to waste paint or time. And we're going to come back up here. We're going to fill in some of this lighter area with the moon. That's where we might take a blow dry. We're going to work on the grass. We'll put our jar in. We'll put our fireflies in. It's going to go pretty quick. So we're going to get a good amount of this blue paint going here. I'm going to stick it right in the middle of my palette here. So something like that. And I'm going to take just a tiny bit of black here. Right, so I have a ton of blue, a little tiny bit of black, and some white. And like I said, we're not going to be painting the whole bottom of our canvas with our background color because we don't want to waste paint. So let's come 3/4 of the way down, about, doesn't have to be perfect, and we'll take our blue and we'll draw a line right here just to tell us where we can stop. And this is just a guideline. so that we know what we're doing when we get down there. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, we're going to take again just a teeny tiny bit of blue, and I'm working with my bigger brush. I have a really big brush, but I'm not going to use this one. I would say if you have a brush that's an inch or so, it's probably the best one. This one's probably 1.5 inches. It might be a little bit big when we're up here trying to do the moon shape, because you have to do sort of small circles. So if you're having trouble getting the circles to be even up at the top here, but you want to use this bigger brush once you get down to the bottom to be able to cover more area, if you wanted to use a medium or smaller size brush for just that top part and then switch back to this brush, that's okay. Use whatever brush you feel like works best for you. So we're going to take just a little bit of our blue paint here. We're going to identify where we want to put our moon. I put mine top right. You can certainly put yours top left, in the middle. You can do one kind of off to the side if you want, wherever you want to put yours. So we're going to make just a circle. If you get blue paint in the circle while we're doing the background, it's not a big deal. And so we're going to take our big brush, and we're going to start to come around our moon. And so this pattern that I'm doing, this directional brush stroke that I'm doing, is going to follow you all the way down to this bottom line, right? So we're not going to do circles here, and then we're going to get to the point where we're coming down here and we're going straight. You want to keep this circle just getting bigger and bigger as you go out, but keep that kind of circular pattern going. And if you want to do a little rough circle like I just did so that you can see the pattern as you're going down, you can certainly do that if that helps. So for now, we're just loading up our blue. Make sure you're getting your edges too. Definitely your left and your right side. If you want to do your top edge, feel free to do that. Not a necessity. This background we're going to work a little bit quickly so that we make sure our blue background color is still wet when we go to mix in our blending colors. So we're going to come about halfway out with this blue. I'll say cover roughly half the area with your blue background color. Alright, and this is where we're going to start to work in some of our white. So this is how we're going to get these little kind of striations of our lighter color. And so you're not going to have a lot of area in this top part that is plain white. Most of it is going to mix with this blue that we already have because it's wet. And so we're going to get kind of areas of lighter blue. The only part that should be really, really bright white is the actual moon, because it's going to make it glow a little bit. And so we'll take our brush that has our blue paint on it, and we're going to put just a little bit of white on there. Tiny bit. Start with a little, you can always add more. And we're going to come right next to the moon, and we're just going to mimic that circular pattern that we've been doing with just our blue, except this time we're going to have our blue and our white. And so your colors should be kind of mixing together. If you see that you have just a big streak of white, you might have had a little bit too much paint, but that's not a huge problem. You can always dip back into your blue and put that back in. Not a big deal. Following that same circular pattern that we've been doing. We're going to make it look like this light is radiating out from the moon. If I want to add maybe a little bit more blue, I can do that. If you feel like your paints are not mixing as well as they should, if you feel like your brush is kind of dragging, then add a little bit more paint. That might mean that your paint is drying too quickly, which would mean that you don't probably have enough to be spread around. So you can really put a lot of paint on that brush, especially when we're going with the background, because we don't want any parts of the background to be see-through. I find that with, I don't know whether it's with this blue particularly or with just blues in general in the background, they can be pretty transparent. So load it right up. We don't want to see any of that background poking through. All right. So I'd say we have our blue and our white mixed to about halfway into this area of our canvas. And so now that we're towards the outside edge, what we're going to do is we're going to start to mix our black in so that our sky gets darker as we move away from the moon, because the light won't be shining quite as bright the farther away we get. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take a big chunk of my blue paint and a little bit of my black. So I have that right here. I'm going to go maybe 75% blue, 25% black, and I'm going to mix that color up. And so what you're going to get is a dark, dark, dark blue that looks almost black. In your little palette or on your plate, whatever you're mixing on, it's going to look very, very dark. And the purpose of this is so that when we go to mix in our colors, the white that we already put on blended with the blue pretty nicely. It goes in fairly smooth. But what happens with the black paint sometimes is once you put a streak of black in there, it's really hard to mix in the blue paint because the blue is so much lighter. So kind of tempering the black paint with some of the blue helps it not be quite as severe. Once you get down to this bottom part, if you feel like this dark blue that we mixed up isn't quite dark enough, you can certainly add just some plain black in there. But let's start with this kind of very dark black-blue mix that we have here. And we're going to do the same thing that we did on the top here. We're going to start with just our blue color, and then we're going to put in streaks of our darker blue. You don't have to rinse your brush for this part. If you just, I kind of use just the little corner of my brush to mix it. If you have a like a paper towel or a rag with you, which I forgot, I'll go grab that. You can just kind of squish off the extra paint on your brush and go right in with this. If you have a lot of different colors on your brush, if you have like white and blue and black all mixed together, if you want to rinse it off, dry it real good and start over, you can certainly do that. Actually, I have this right here. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm not going to rinse my brush. I'm just going to start again with my plain blue. I'm going to layer this on nice and thick. We don't have to worry about getting this first layer of color crazy smooth. We want it to be nice and thick so that we can mix our colors in fluidly. And now if you happen to go underneath your line a little bit that we made, not a big deal. Because I'll clue you into our next step. Below this line, we're just going to be painting black. So if this kind of dips down into your white area, don't even worry about it. Now your 3/4 of your right side and 3/4 of your left side should be filled in at this point, so make sure that the edges of your painting, all the way over here, and all the way over here are also colored in. And then so once I have my color laid down, I'm going to come in with that dark black blue that I made. And not too much, we can always add more. Start with just a little bit. And we're going to work it in the same way that we worked that white in. Following that circular pattern that we started with. I find it easiest to come almost all the way around your circle every brush stroke that you do. If you're trying to do like this type of thing where you're going, you know, spot by spot and you keep starting your brush stroke over, you're gonna get these little areas where your brush kind of like pokes through the paint. And so as much as you can, try to go the whole length of your circle, and it'll make it a lot smoother. Nice long brush strokes. We're filling in any areas where we see any background poking through. All the way down here, don't forget the corners. All right, I think we're looking pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna throw this into my water cup that I have hiding back here. Right now, I'm gonna take my, I'll say medium-sized brush. If you have something in either, I'm gonna maybe use this one, but if you have something in this realm, you can use one of those too. It can be round or flat. Doesn't really matter. The only thing I would say for this part, we're going to be starting to fill in our moon and kind of around the moon area where there are a little bit stronger highlights. If you use anything that's too much smaller than this, or if you have a very short brush, I know I have one of those. If you have a very short brush like this, that's pretty stiff, what I'll say is that since this paint is still a little bit wet, it might be almost dry by the time you get all the way down here, but since this stuff is a little bit wet, if you use a brush that's too stiff or too short, sometimes when you're going to apply paint, it will do the exact opposite and it'll kind of just drag through the paint that you already have on the canvas. And then you'll get these gaps where you can almost see through the canvas, even if you couldn't in that area before. So I would say for this part where you're blending into paint that's already on the canvas, try to get a brush that is soft or a little bit longer, longer in the bristle area. So if you see, this brush is almost twice as long as the bristles on this brush. So go with your longer one, your softer brush, whatever's easier. So I'm going to go with this big guy because the bristles are pretty soft and it's long. Alright, so we're going to hop back up to the moon here. If you have gotten any blue paint into your moon, not a big deal. We're going to take our brush with our white, and we're going to just paint that moon back in. If your circle is looking a little wobbly, we can try to fix that circle. Of course, it doesn't need to be perfect. Alright, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to take this brush, the one that I used to make the moon, I'm going to wipe off a majority of the paint that is on here. And so you're almost working with just kind of a dry brush. Just has my leftover paint on it. It looks like more than it is, I promise. And so we're going to come around the outside of the moon with just this leftover paint here. And we're going to make some little white highlights that come around. So I have a little too much paint on my brush. I think I want a little less. Because you do want them to blend a little bit. If you don't feel like they're blending that well, you can definitely take some of your blue. If you want to take a touch of your blue so that these blend a little better, you can do that. Now, if you already have these white highlights around your moon, you feel like what you have is enough, then you can leave them just how they are. But if you feel like you did a very good job of blending those highlights in there, and they kind of got lost, and you just sort of have a one-tone light to dark blue, then that's why we're going to add these in. So if you don't feel like you need them, if you don't want to add back in and you don't want to mess up what you already have, then by all means leave what you have. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Into the water. Now if you're having trouble making your circle circular, you can definitely put something down to trace it if you want, a bottle cap or something like that. If you don't want to do that and you want to work on just a freehand circle, the easiest thing that I find to do is that if you can't identify what's wrong with the circle, you might be able to look at it and be like, that's not a perfect circle, but you can't really figure out what's wrong with it. If you take your circle and you look at it this way and you can't really figure it out, if you turn it this way and you turn it upside down and you turn it this way, you'll be able to see what parts of it are flat a little bit better when you reorient it versus if you're just kind of standing straight up looking at it. So turn it to every side and those kind of flat spots will kind of highlight themselves a little bit more based on whatever side you're looking at. It also really helps if you take a few steps back, get 5-10 feet away from your canvas, and sometimes that helps also identify kind of the lopsided edges. I'm going to rinse out my medium-sized brush, the one that I used to make the moon. So I'm going to use this one for our next step, which, like I said before, was we're just going to paint this whole bottom part black. And so there are quite a few layers in this bottom grassy area there, and that's what's going to give us the depth so that it looks like your jar is kind of sitting in the grass. But the black grass in the front also kind of makes it look like our perspective is shifted down, so it kind of looks like we are down low, like kind of looking into the grass. And you'll be able to see that really well once we get, so we have a layer in the back of like dark kind of black grass blades. Then we have a darker green, we have a lighter green with some little blue ones, and then we have a black layer. When we do our green, our light and our dark green layer, and we just have that, it's going to look like you're sitting up, just kind of looking at maybe a jar in the grass a few feet away from you. But once you put the black blades of grass in the front, it really kind of brings your perspective down a little bit. So that's a really nice thing to see as we're going. And so I'm going to take this brush is probably an inch or 3/4 inch brush. Don't get one too small because we are just filling this bottom part in. And you don't want to be here forever, just painting in a whole section black. I'm going to take just my plain black. I'm going to fill in the bottom here, right up to your line. So there should be no white area left. This is also the time that if you did want to paint that very bottom edge, like all the way down here, you can do that. You likely won't ever see that edge, but I know that if you just want to paint all 4 edges so that you feel like they're all complete, you can certainly do that. Alright, so we're going to come right up to our line, maybe a little higher, just to make sure we get all those spaces filled in. Right, so you should have something that looks like that. And so this is the part where we might diverge a little bit. So we're going to take our finger and we're going to test and see if we're dry. So mine is relatively dry. And so what I suggest when you're trying to see if your painting is dry, a lot of the time you can look at it and see when the paint is wet, it'll be shiny, and when it's not wet, it'll be matte. Sometimes it's a little tricky though, depending on what color you're using. Sometimes it's a little misleading. So what I do suggest is take a finger that doesn't have paint on it, which sometimes is hard to find, and just put your finger down on it and lift it up. So you're kind of just tapping, and then you look at your finger to see if there's any paint on it. What I don't suggest that a lot of people do is they'll take their hand and they'll go like this to try to see if it's dry or if it's wet. But the problem with that is if you have a directional brush stroke like we have here, and you take your hand to try to test the dryness and you go like this, if it's not dry, you're not only going to get a handful of paint, but you're going to mess up the nice directional brush strokes that we have. So instead of wiping to see if it's dry, try just tapping your finger in a couple spots, up, down. See, I'm a little bit wet over here, but I think that's okay for now. If you have some spots that you can tell are really, really wet, then I would say take a second, use the blow dryer, just in this bottom area. If like your moon is still wet, not a big deal. If anything up here is still wet, not a huge deal. But I have like one area here that's definitely still wet that I might just let hang out for a minute. If you have any big areas, feel free to pause the video here, blow dry real quick, and then come right back. We're going to be using the same brush with the same black on it, so no need to rinse for now. If you are all dry, or if you're done blow drying, then we can take our brush like this and we're going to start to put in our blades of grass, these ones that kind of show up in the back. And so I would say that the height of these forest blades of grass are going to be, I'll say, no higher than halfway. If they come round about halfway up your canvas, mine's a little bit lower than halfway, maybe a third of the way up your canvas. That's perfect. Okay, and so to make these blades of grass, I think in our last video where we had the flowers, this was kind of a relevant lesson too, but what you don't really want to do, and I'm just doing this as an example, it's going to get covered up, so don't worry about it. What you don't really want is blades of grass that are straight up like that. Sometimes it gets confusing as to what they are. It doesn't really look like blades of grass. So what you want to do is take your blades of grass and kind of have them bend one way or the other. Now you can have some short little guys like this. You can have some really tall ones. You can have some ones like this that go right off the side of the canvas. That's not a big deal at all. But what you want to do is give them some movement. Try not to do this. Because then not only are you going to have some stiff looking grass, but you're going to have all these little spaces in between your blades of grass, and you're going to be able to see our line that comes straight across. So what you want to do is you're going to take your brush to make these blades. You're going to start your brush horizontally. Sorry. You're going to start with your brush horizontally, and you're going to bring it straight up. So our brush, let's see, it's probably hard to see. So you're going to start with your brush horizontally, you're going to bring it up, and as you come up, you're going to twist the brush so that when you end, your brush is vertical, or you're riding on kind of the vertical side of your brush. So you're going to start with it like this. As you come up, you're going to twist so that when you end, you're like this. And that's how you're going to get that point on the top of your blade of grass. So that one was kind of ugly, but that's okay. Right, so I'm going to cover up some of these kind of weird guys that I made down here. So you're going to start horizontal, you're going to twist and come up vertical. Some of these ones that I'm making are really big, just so you guys can see, hopefully. You definitely don't need to make yours as big as I'm making them. And I would say don't spend too much time down here making little ones, because we have so many layers of this grass that you aren't going to see these tiny guys at the bottom. So really focus on coming up here, getting some of these points to be real nice and sharp. So I know I've said this in my classes where I paint at the library, but I don't know if I've ever said this in one of my online classes, but when it comes to painting grass or leaves or anything in nature, you want to make sure you give them a little bit of height variety. And so, see, what I was kind of doing is all of my blades of grass up here kind of end at the same spot. So what you want to do is just make sure you get some shorter ones, some taller ones, some thicker ones, some thinner ones. Don't be afraid to give it some variety, because it's going to look just a little bit unnatural if all of your blades of grass are the very same height, if they're all the same width, if they're all the same shape. Alright, so you should be about here. Mine went a little bit taller than they did in this original one, but that's okay. Alright, let me rinse this brush. We're going to be using this brush again. But mine had a lot of black paint in it, so we're going to rinse just so it doesn't get too muddy. Alright, we're going to pick up a yellow, and we're going to start to make the grass colors. And I'll show you what I'm going to do here. Now, if you have any of the color left that we used to work into our original blue over here, remember we mixed some blue and some black together to give us kind of like a super, super dark blue. That will work really well to get you a dark green. So if you have that blue-black mixture that we have before, you can go ahead and put some of your yellow right on top of it and mix that up, and it should give you a dark green. I also have a plain pot over here of just plain yellow that I'm going to mix just some blue into to get a lighter green. So over here, you should be able to see some of my darker green ones up a little bit higher here, and then some of my lighter green ones are going to be on the bottom. So we're working with 2 greens here. There's not a ton of color in this painting as a whole, so varieties within the colors that we're using is going to do well to give the painting layers. So I'm just mixing up this darkest green here. And so this is the green that went into my blue-black mixture. As you can see, it's turning kind of into like a, almost spilled, a little bit of like a, I don't know what that is, olivey green? And so I think I want my dark green to be a little bit darker even than that. So if you have a little bit more of your blue or a little bit more of your black, and you want to add a little bit more in there to get it even darker, you can do that. Because I don't want my light green to have to be like lime green. We still want the light green to be a grassy green, just a different shade. So I am going to darken this darker color up. I might have just put too much yellow. That's okay. There we go. So that's more of the darker green that I'm going for. And I'm going to come over here in my lighter green. I'm going to add some blue into this lighter, or this yellow to make a lighter green. Okay, so you can see over here I have my dark green, over here I have my light green. Right, so I have my 2 shades ready to go. Alright. And so my canvas is, I mean, it's pretty dry at this point. If you feel like, if you had to pause and take a moment to finish up your grass and it's dry at this point, then you can just move on with this next step. If you feel like you want to blow dry it really quick, you can certainly do that. I'm going to just take a quick break and blow dry mine. Nice and quick. It should be good to go. And so when we're applying this, we're going to start with our darker green color. I just hate washing my brushes, so I'm just gonna kind of squeeze off the lighter green because that's the last one that I mixed, but I'm gonna be using my darker green. So I just wiped a little bit of it off since we're using both of the greens, so we don't need to wash it and clean it and all that stuff. So we're gonna go in with our dark green. I'm still using this is my like maybe 3/4 inch, 4 inch brush. Because we're putting these blades of grass to fill space. So you don't want like a teeny tiny detail brush doing every blade of grass, because you will be here forever. So we're just kind of space filling right now. And so our dark green layer of grass is going to come down a little bit lower than our black background grass. And so that's not to say that, you know, a random blade or two of your dark green grass can't come up or above where this grass is. You do kind of want them integrated a little bit, but I'll say as a general rule, your dark green grass is going to come a little bit lower than this black area because we're trying to show a little bit of depth here. And so you're just going to do the same thing that we did with our black. You're going to start at the bottom with a horizontal brush. You're going to come up, kind of twist as you're coming up. And so it's going to look kind of funny at first because you're just throwing blades of grass down here. But that's okay, because the bottoms of the dark green grass are going to be covered by our light green grass, and then the bottoms of our light green grass are going to be covered by our layer in the front of our black grass. So don't worry too much about the layering at this point and what this bottom edge of your grass looks like, because we won't see it. And so just take some time right now to kind of fill this area in. Again, coming a little bit below this black grass that you've made, but hey, a stray blade or two could come up. Whoops. Dipped right into the wrong color. It was on a roll. Also, don't feel like your blades of grass have to be spaced out in any particular way. They are going to overlap. Sometimes you're going to overlap two blades of grass, and since they're the same color, you're kind of going to not be able to see one of them, but that's okay. We're just filling space here. And so you kind of want to make sure that these in-between areas where your black grass was get kind of filled in. You don't want huge blue areas at the bottom here showing through. So like I see some light blue of the sky down here. I'm going to kind of just strategically place my grass to cover those areas because you don't really want to see through it too much. And of course your lighter green grass and our other colors of grass will cover that just a little bit, so it's not a huge deal. You don't have to cover every spot, but try to at least fill in if you have any big gaps still. All right, that should be good for the dark green. Again, I'm not going to wash this off. I'm just going to kind of squeeze out just enough to switch colors. And again, I'm going to do the very same thing with my light green grass. And so this grass, just like the dark green, is going to be just a step lower than the layer that we just made. It's going to come up just shy of that bottom layer, or that previous layer of dark green grass. But if you want to throw, you know, a long blade up here or there, that's okay. So since we're doing kind of green on green here, I didn't blow dry my dark green before I went in with my light green. It didn't really prove to be a problem on my canvas, but if you feel like you want to blow dry that dark green first, you can do that, especially if you used very thick paint to put that dark green grass in there. You can definitely pause and give that a quick blow dry. If not, we can just kind of go right on top of it. And now in this space where we have our light green grass, I also have kind of a light blue grass. You see in my original copy over here, every once in a while I have just a little piece of light blue grass. And I felt like that kind of broke up the green a little bit, so you didn't have black, dark green, light green, black. It just gave it a little bit of a variety there. So if you want to do that, by all means grab another brush. I don't have another brush that's that same size, so I'll grab a medium one like this. And so you should have a little bit of plain blue and a little bit of white left on your palette. If you do, if you don't, you can grab some of those. And so I'm just going to mix up a very light blue. It's going to be like a, kind of like a sky blue, I guess. And if you don't like those little blue blades of grass in there, you don't need to put those in. If you wanted to do even like a third shade of green instead of a blue, you can do that. So something like that, just a very, very light blue. So I can take this light blue and come in here and just throw a couple blades of that in there if you want to. Doesn't have to be a lot. Just think of it as a highlight. And I'm using the same method to put these on as I've been doing all the other blades of grass. They're a little bit thinner because this brush is smaller, but if you wanted to rinse the brush that you have been using to put the grass on, to put on the blue grass, then you can definitely do that. We've got a couple pieces of bluegrass. This is Kentucky, right? Alright. So I think for now, I should be good to go with my light green. You don't need to go all the way down to the bottom because the bottom part is going to be that black grass. So leave a little room at the bottom. No need to fill up the whole bottom space because then we're going to have to cover it up, and we don't want to cover up all of these nice blades of grass that we already made. So I probably have like an inch or so at the bottom that just has nothing but the black paint on it at this point in time. So I'm going to put all of my brushes into my water. We are going to switch to our round detail brush next, so if you want to just throw those brushes that you've already used in the water, they can just hang out there. We are going to blow dry everything that we have right now. Definitely all this grass we want dry because this jar is going to kind of settle down into the grass and we don't want to pick up any of these greens in our jar. So give it a blow dry and head back when you're done. We're back and we're going to start on the jar. And so I grabbed my little detail brush. I have two round ones here that I'm going to use. If you don't have a round one, you can grab whatever smallest, I'll say flat brush that you have. And again, to kind of mimic the roundness of this brush, what you're going to do is just turn this one sideways and use the brush in this way. So you just have to be more thoughtful of the way that you're holding this brush if you are using a flat brush, but it's definitely not a problem if you need to substitute in that way. Okay, and so for this jar, I'm mainly going to be using white. I might use some of that light blue that I used to make some of these blades of grass down here too, but that's going to come after. Right now we're just focused on the white. And so I'm going to take a little bit of my white. And so the best things about glass jars is that you don't essentially need to make the inside of the jar. You're just kind of outlining it, and that's going to give the illusion of glass. And so all of these blades of grass that we have behind the jar, you're going to be able to see through the jar because it is clear. And so we don't need to paint over anything that we did. We're just going to be doing the lid of the jar, or the rim, the opening of the jar. We're going to be doing the sides. We're going to put a little highlights on it, and that's the whole jar. Okay, so we are going to start at the top. We're going to do the rim of the jar, find that it's easier to do that, and then drop down and do the sides than it is to do the sides and try to have them meet up at the top. Alright, so let's identify where we want the top of our jar to be. I would say mine here is maybe, I don't know, a shy 2/3 of the way up the painting. If it's a little higher or a little lower than that, it's not a huge deal. You don't want it so far up though that you feel like the bottom of your jar is going to be floating up here. You want it low enough so that it looks like the bottom of your jar is kind of nestled in the grass down here. So if you're not sure up here, I would say err on the side of doing it a little bit lower, just to be safe. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to do the rim of the jar, which is going to be a very long, very thin oval. And if you're not sure, you can watch me first. I'm going to try to make it as level as I can. In the camera, it's a little tricky sometimes. So you're going to have something like that. And so another good thing about glass jars is that since glass is clear, the only thing that we see of them in a painting like this is going to be the parts where light is kind of reflecting on them. And so if you're doing one of your lines or you're doing the rim of the jar and let's say your brush runs out of paint or you can't make it the whole way around or you kind of skip a little part like I did, that's okay because it's not like we need to outline the jar or give it a hard line because of the principles of glass. It's okay if it has little breaks like that, if it's a little bit uneven, because we aren't defining the edge of the jar so much as we are defining where the light is hitting the jar, if that makes sense. So what I'm saying is that you have a little bit more wiggle room in this than maybe you think you have. And so I can even, I can come back and kind of smooth this out, but again, it doesn't need to be outlined the whole way. Having gaps kind of lends itself to the way that the light would kind of shine on the glass, so no big deal if you don't feel like you nailed that part. Alright, so now we're going to drop down the kind of neck of the bottle jar. We're going to come down the sides maybe I don't know, a 1/2 inch or so. And that's going to be kind of where the threads of the jar are. we're looking at the neck of the jar. We're going to come out and then straight down. We'll do the same on the other side. We're going to come down and out. All right. Okay, so we have a roundabout outline of our jar. And I'll show you a little trick here. If yours is a little uneven, I did the same thing in both of mine. I don't know why I have one side that just wants to be out further. But I'll show you a trick to fix it, the trick that I used on the other side. So if you have any more of that kind of dark blue black color that we used in the sky, if you have some of that left, definitely utilize that. But if you don't, I just came in the center of my palette here and I like mixed a little bit of it up. It's just that it's like maybe 75% blue, 25% black. The ratio in this part is not as important. But if you did the two sides of your jar and one is wildly different than the other, like mine, and you're like, oh no, I messed this whole thing up, do not worry, because what we can do, we can take this nice dark color and we can kind of go over the spots that we messed up. And erase them. And of course this isn't a flawless job here, but what it's doing is kind of camouflaging the areas that we don't want, and it's bringing attention to the areas that we do like. And when it's all said and done, the areas that you fix with this method are kind of just going to look like lowlights, because we're going to use that light blue to make highlights. So if you need to fix something, it's kind of just going to look like a lined area. And I can always go right back over that line with my white. So don't worry if you did your outline of your jar and you're like, oh no, I messed the whole thing up. Because you did not, promise. Alright, so we'll come to the top of our jar here. We're going to let those little areas that we fixed dry for a minute. And we're going to start on the threads of our jar. So down here on kind of the neck of the jar here, we're going to alternate each side, where we're going to start a little bit on the outside of where we made this, the neck part. We're going to take a bunch of our white paint and we're going to drag it in towards the center. And now that's not going to go all the way across the length of your bottle or your jar, but that's okay. So we're going to just drag it as far as it goes. And we're going to stop. We're going to come on the other side just a little bit lower. Again, right on the outside. We're going to drag it in. And it's going to trail off. Other side. We're going to drag it in. It's going to trail off. And now the number of threads that you have is going to depend on how long the neck of your jar is. So if you can only fit like 2 or 3, that's okay. If you can fit a lot, then even better. As long as you get I would say 3 is probably the number to make sure that you kind of get that illusion there. Man, it's hard to paint with it upright like that. We're doing okay though. Alright, so I've got my threads here. Alright, now down here, the neck of the jar, I'm going to fix mine a little bit. Kind of try to match both sides here. Look at that, better already. Alright. So we're going to give a little highlight on this side. I did it on the left. Over here, I'm going to do it on the right. So I'm going to take my paint over here. I'm going to kind of come below where my threads are. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with them though. I'm going to start on one side and I'm going to pull it over and just kind of let the paint stop where it stops. Right? That's going to look like our highlight. So I have one little highlight there. I'll kind of reverse what I did on my copy over here on this copy. You can do a little highlight on the curve of the jar, so I'll do it on this side. So you're kind of just miming this curve, but on the inside of the jar. Do that. It's going to make it look nice and shiny. And then I have a few little highlights on the edge of my jar. Again, you're just kind of miming the lines that you've already made, just a little bit closer in. Now you don't want to go crazy with these highlights because again, it's just a glass jar. We want to make sure that we're sticking with that idea that we're only working with light here. We're not actually drawing something with a defined edge that you might see in a painting. And so, once we have the gist of our jar done, I'm going to take this light blue that we used for some of these pieces of our grass, and I'm going to use that to highlight our highlights, which I know sounds kind of silly. I'm just going to take this anywhere where I feel like I have a real thick white line that I kind of want broken up so that it doesn't look so harsh. I'm going to use this light blue, so I'll do it maybe on this thread here. Do a little bit in this highlight. Maybe down to this highlight here. Now you don't have to do it just like mine. And so your jar is just going to kind of disappear into your grass here. Just kind of stop it wherever you feel like works for your jar. Alright. And so you can see the lines on the sides of my jar kind of just disappear into that grass area. I'm going to rinse this guy off. And in case you're wondering, you would technically see the threads of the jar on the other side of the jar if we were really committed to making this a completely accurate visual representation of a glass jar here. But we're gonna cut ourselves a little slack, because what would happen if we tried to make those threads on the other side of the jar? It would get a little confusing visually. So what you can do if you want is take either your white or your blue. If you want to come like under the lip of this jar, that wasn't great. If you want to come under this side over here and give it just like one or two little rounds, you could do that. You don't need to. But I would say definitely leave a space in there so that you can tell more easily that the jar is open. Alright, so rinse this, and dry this. Okay, and so this is going to be our fun part. Let's see. For this part, I'm going to take a medium, this is kind of like an old, it's pretty rough, beat up brush that I have. The type of brush that you use for this part doesn't matter all that much. So we're going to be creating, in my head they were additional fireflies, like little tiny guys. If you look in here, we have kind of these little splatters, just a few. It's not too many, but my original intention was to have them be little tiny fireflies that you could see in the distance, I guess. But when I put them on, they looked more like stars. So if you like this kind of look of the splatter paint, you can definitely say that they're stars, and you can do more than I did. If you want them to seem more like tiny fireflies, then I would say focus them not so much up here, as you're going to focus them in this area where your fireflies are going to be. You can even, I dropped some down here and inside the jar so that it looks more like fireflies, because you wouldn't see stars down here, obviously. So if you want them to just look like more little tiny fireflies, I would say try to concentrate this area where you're putting these. I mean, it's kind of hard when you're doing kind of like a splatter paint type thing, but it can be done. And so what we're going to do is take a little bit of our white paint, and we're going to mix just a little bit of water into it so that it becomes more liquidy and easier to kind of splatter onto our canvas here. So I can't really lean it up and show you because it would run out. That's kind of the texture that you're going for. If you tilt your tray, this paint should be liquidy enough that it will kind of run around your tray. And now I'm gonna have to put my canvas down to do this, because I don't think I can't do it that way. So what you're gonna do is, let's see, you're gonna put your canvas down like this, and you're gonna take your brush and you're gonna tap it like this with your water and white paint mixture. And that should give you these little white specks. Again, get some inside your jar. Get some kind of down in your grass area. Try to make it go along the trail of the fireflies. So it's going to kind of be coming into this area. All right. Good. All right, quick and easy. So that brush is going in the water. And so our next step is to take our white, just our plain white. We're going to put that kind of watery white to the side. We're going to use just our regular white out of the bottle at this point. And we're going to start to decide where we want our fireflies to go. And so we're just using plain white. We're going to add the yellow after. So we're going to take our white, and I like to put a couple of the fireflies in the jar, but we're going to start by just putting, I'll say maybe a pea-sized amount of white in the centers of wherever we want to put our fireflies. I like to have one up here, kind of coming into the jar. So you can put one here. And these are going to be the same as our blades of grass, in that you want to make them different sizes. They're all going to be round, so not different shapes, but give them a little bit of variety in their size and location. Try not to make them equidistant from each other, because then they're going to start to look more like polka dots. So try to, put some closer together, some a little farther apart. If you have nice big splatters, then you might get them a little bit confused with where your fireflies are going to go, but that's okay. And these don't need to be perfect circles. We're going to use them to actually make that kind of radiating area of light. So don't worry about the shape of this circle that we're putting down right at this very moment. Alright, so we have a roundabout idea of where we're going to be putting our fireflies. Oops. We're going to take our yellow paint. Let's see, do I have a spot left? You don't need too much of this at all. It's just going to be that little bit of light that you see coming out from around our fireflies, so you don't need too much white or too much yellow paint at all. And so to make our fireflies, we're going to pick out one of our little dots that we've just made, and we're going to start our yellow paint inside that white area. So you should have a pretty good little glob of paint there. And so we're going to take our yellow on this same brush, I didn't wash it off, and we're going to start inside this white area. And all we're going to do is we're going to drag some of that white paint out into a circle, and it's going to blend a little bit with our yellow. And it's going to give us this little radiating light shape here. And so I know it's kind of hard to see. Let's see if I go like that. So the outside of your little firefly is going to be kind of a mix between yellow and white. And that's what we want. If you don't feel like you have enough white paint in this little firefly area to be able to drag some of it out to the outside, then you can dip back into your white. It's not a big deal. I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller than this other one. Make them a few different sizes. This one up here is pretty big. And so this light that's coming out from your fireflies doesn't need to be perfect finished circles, so what you don't really want to make is like a bullseye. You want your brush to kind of pick up and drag in certain areas and leave little gaps in certain areas, right? So we're not making a perfect swirl. You don't want it to look like a little target. You do want that line to be a little bit broken. All right. And so you're just going to continue that yellow and white swirling pattern on all of these fireflies that you've made over here. So I have some in the grass here, don't forget those. And so what I did was I took my fireflies, I kind of have a few that come up here, and as mine go over to this right side of my canvas, I have them get a little bit smaller and a little bit closer together until they kind of trail off. And so as you can see on this side, my biggest ones are kind of over by the jar, and as I get over to this side, they get smaller and smaller. And so you're going to do the same thing that you do for the big ones, you're just not going to make your swirls quite as big. So you won't need quite as much paint on your brush to do those. And so try to vary them in sizes a little bit, but as they kind of taper off into the distance, make sure they get smaller if you have them kind of disappearing. You can do that same thing if you want them to go up to the left here, or to my left, in any direction that you want them to kind of look like they are going farther away from you, make them smaller. Okay, so I'm just gonna finish up these guys, and then we will check back in. Another thing that I wanted to point out, just about paints in general, because I know that since we are doing these classes online now, if you have been taking these classes, you have probably had to get your own paint. And so I just wanted to point out that all this white paint that I have been using during this is paint that I got out of a, out of a container like this size. And I've had multiple containers sitting on my painting table for longer than I want to admit. But, you know, you just keep getting new ones, and there's paint left over in there, and I would keep them upside down, and, you know, a little would come out, but I didn't want to throw them away because I knew that there was paint in there. And so today, I kind of cut them open, and I was able to get probably 2 or 3 times the paint that's on here out of them from taking a little tool. I have one of these. I mean, you can use a knife or a spoon or anything too, but from scraping the inside of those empty containers that I had, and I got a ton of paint out of them. So if you are getting to the end of your colors, or you need to buy new ones, or you're like, oh no, I ran out of white, or I ran out of blue, if you have an instrument to safely be able to cut open that plastic container, I would definitely suggest it, because you want to get your money's worth, right? So I know a lot of people do this with makeup too, where you kind of open up those containers when you think you got to the end. So I would definitely suggest that, because there is still a lot of paint left in there after the days when you've been able to squirt it out of the jar regularly. So utilize all that paint that's in there. And now if you have 2 of your dots that you originally meant to be fireflies, let's say these 2 right here, that you think you might have put too close together, or if you made one too big and it kind of eclipses the other one, then I'll say right here. So I had one that I had planned for right here, I made it, and it got a little bit bigger than I thought it was going to. And I had originally planned to put another one right here, but obviously that's going to be way too close, they're going to run into each other. So you can just leave that one as kind of a star, or one of those far away fireflies. If the areas that you've planned for them don't really pan out, that is not a big deal at all. You don't need to fill them all in like you had originally planned. Sometimes when you're on a roll with these kind of spirally brush strokes here, they get a little bit bigger than you had thought, so not a big deal. And if you feel like you're in an area of the painting, once you've done all of the fireflies that you originally had planned, if you get to an area where you feel like you need an extra one, add an extra one in wherever you feel like it fits. We can kind of adjust our game plan as we go. Look at these little tiny guys out here. Alright, I think that about do it for me. Alright, I think that's about all I have as far as our fireflies. So I'm gonna rinse this guy off. And so this very last thing that we're gonna do with the fireflies, if you want to, this is not a necessity again, if your little splattered fireflies came out smaller than you had wanted them, and they're not really reading like fireflies, what you can do is just take the same brush that we've been using, and if you want to put some extra little fireflies in that don't have that kind of radiating light, if you want to just put some bigger spots in between your fireflies so that it looks like there are more, it'll kind of help visually make that trail if that's what you were looking to make. So if you need to put some of these bigger pieces in to help kind of guide your eye in this right direction, then you can do that. You don't need these, but if you really want to fill in that space but you don't want to do too many fireflies that it's going to be cluttered, then try just adding some dots like this. And that kind of fills up that area without it being too much. Alright, so this one into the water. We're going to pull out our brush that we used for our grass. And so if that brush is in your water, pull that out. If it's clean, then we're going to grab it. Alright, so we are on our very last step here. And so all we need to do now is take our black grass. We're going to do just the same brush stroke that we've been doing for all of these blades of grass. And we're going to send them up here to kind of camouflage this bottom area. And so since this very bottom of our canvas is already black, it's not going to take quite as many blades as the green or the dark green did. So we're really just kind of filling in this area so that the black blades of grass are going to do two things. They're going to disguise this bottom green line, and they're also going to kind of nestle our jar into the grass a little bit more. And so if your glass jar kind of ends abruptly in this grass, then we're going to strategically send up a blade of grass here on the sides to kind of eclipse where our jar ends so that it looks like it's kind of snuggled down into that grass area. So we're going to take our black paint. We're going to do just the same thing for these blades of grass that we did for the others. We're going to start at the bottom here, shoot them up. Now, if some of your blades of grass come up and overlap some of your fireflies, then that's okay. If you want your fireflies to be more in the foreground, especially these ones that are outside here, you can kind of go back over them so that the grass doesn't cover them. but especially the ones that are inside your jar. If these blades of grass come over your fireflies, then that would be okay in terms of perspective because our black blades of grass are kind of in front of our jar and the fireflies are in the jar. So it would make sense that the grass comes kind of up over top of them. So if you do really want to push the idea of the depth of your landscape here, if you do throw a black blade of grass up kind of over maybe this guy on the side, then that would really kind of reinforce that layering that we have. But not necessary, but if you did do it, don't worry about it. And so the very last thing that you have to do, if you want to throw a little signature down in the corner, you can do that. Other than that, that's all I have for you guys. And so again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. I usually try to look at them when the video goes up so that in case anybody is having trouble with any particular area, I can help with that. I know it's different when I'm over here and you guys are at home. I can't help as much, but I know you guys have learned a lot, and it's definitely okay to do things your own way. If you have an element of the painting that you want to change, that you think would be better a certain way, by all means do it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys make and how you make it your own.